the backhand side is the side that's the most problematic regarding tennis elbow. And it makes a lot of sense to me because when I think of the weakest shots in tennis, it is the shots that are hit with the weak side of the arm, which is this side. And the strong side of the arm is this side because it's supported by more the core of the body. So a forehand or an overhead or a serve is going to be more protected in regards to tennis elbow compared to a one-handed backhand, whether it's a one-handed volley or a slice or a regular one-handed backhand is completely exposed. And it made a lot of sense to me that those strokes could hurt tennis elbow more. And of course, a two-handed backhand is more protected because we have the help of the non-dominant arm. Now, from a medical standpoint, could you give me an explanation why what I'm experiencing with my student is true? Why does the backhand hurt more in regards to tennis elbow? Why can an improper backhand technique that we're going to get into in a moment is so problematic regarding tennis elbow?
And yes, we do see more pain on the backhand side. And the reason is the anatomy and the function of the elbow. So on the outside of the elbow, if you poke around, you'll feel a little bone there called the lateral epicondyle. Lateral means outside, epi means the top part, and then condyle is a rounded edge of a bone. The reason it sticks out is that's where the tendons attach on the outside of the arm. And the function of those muscles and tendons that live on the outside of the elbow, on the tennis elbow side, is to extend the wrist, to supinate, to open the hand, and to do this side-to-side motion, which all gets strained on the backhand shot. So when we're looking at what exactly is happening on the tennis elbow side in that tendon and why we get pain is something called eccentric loading. Eccentric means the lowering phase. So for example, when we can do an exercise, we can lift, that's called the concentric phase, or we can control it on the way down, that's called eccentric. So on that one hand backhand, when you hit a ball, that ball pulls the racket back while you're contracting this way, and that mismatch, that tug is called eccentric loading, and that loads that tendon, and that's where we get the strain from the one hand backhand when we're hitting there. It helps to stabilize the wrist, it helps to support it, and because of that ball impacting on the racket here, it pulls it back, it stretches the tendons that cross the wrist here, pulls on this muscle, and over time that strain and stress on that tendon accumulates into tennis elbow.
Dr. Adrian, that makes a lot of sense, and I can share with you and the audience some of the most common technical flaws that I see on the backhand side. And it is my belief that these technical flaws can only make your tennis elbow worse or can potentially cause tennis elbow. But before I get into it, let me explain why I think the forehand volley, the serve is more protected in regards to tennis elbow, and that is the position of the wrist. So when I hit a forehand volley, my wrist is slightly extended. When I hit a forehand, my wrist is extended. And even on the serve, the wrist is slightly extended. Now, when it comes to the one-handed backhand, you don't want to have too much extension here. The wrist is in a more neutral position. And because of that, it is more exposed to a lack of stability. On top of that, when I hold the racket in a forehand grip, my hand is behind the racket, providing natural stability. When I hold my racket in a continental grip, my hand is behind the racket, providing natural stability. Unfortunately, on the one-handed backhand, there's nothing behind the racket. So the crucial thing when it comes to preventing tennis elbow or making it feel better is to stop hitting one-handed backhands with a continental grip. Because if you take a look at the continental grip, only the thumb is behind the grip, nothing else. And when I make contact, I'm gonna have to squeeze tighter to have stability. And what happens to a lot of players, the racket collapses as they're making contact because of that lack of stability. And Dr. Adrian, as we discussed privately, that goes straight into the elbow. It's very problematic. So what you guys must do, if you happen to have a continental grip, is to switch to an Eastern backhand grip, which is basically the base of your knuckle at bevel number 1. And that is an Eastern backhand grip. You also want to hold the racket a little bit tighter with your knuckles slightly closer together compared to your regular continental grip or your forehand grip. And now in this grip, the thumb is more underneath the racket, and you're going to have more stability when you make contact. And also, interestingly, when we are in an Eastern grip, we naturally get in a neutral racket face more extension in the wrist. And extension in the wrist is good when it comes to stability. Dr. Adrian, from a medical standpoint, does what I'm saying make sense?
Yeah, so there's actually the bone on the top of the forearm here is called the radius. And where it ends, it widens and it provides stability in the wrist there, especially when it's extended. So actually a fun fact is when you fall, you're more likely to break this radial bone right here. And that's what provides the stability and the structure behind that push. So when your wrist is extended, you're using more of that stability and absorbing that shock into the bones, which are much better at doing that, especially over time, versus like you showed in that more exposed position, that puts more strain and stress on the tendons and the muscles on the outside of the elbow, versus relying on the stability of the shoulder, elbow, and wrist being behind it and supporting it.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, Dr. Adrian, on top of that, players at the rec level have a tough time controlling their backhands because of an improper technique. And this poor technique on the backhand can lead to tennis elbow. What I most commonly see is that players swipe across the body in a horizontal way, and this is the technique on the backhand that puts a lot of stress on the arm. Why do I say that? Because it's a technique that's happening with the arm doing this movement in isolation, because the one in the backhand can draw energy from the rest of the body, and it will happen from the back muscles here. So when you see professional players backhand, you will see a vertical swing path where the dominant hand goes above the level of the dominant shoulder. And when this movement takes place, we can help this movement by squeezing the shoulder blades together, and we can accommodate this swing path with our back muscles. So if you have a backhand where the racket is just on a horizontal plane going across the body, you have a little bit of rotation probably. I find that this is also very tough on the shoulder, and you can experience tennis elbow because you, in order to get power, might swing too fast and the body is not supporting that action, and this can be difficult on the arm.